Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I have had quite a break from making Magic the Gathering content, as I'm sure you will have noticed, but I'm going to try and get back into a semi-regular, at least, schedule of churning out some content that will largely still be focused probably in Alchemy, because it is still the format that I enjoy the most, but that is by no means wed to that. I mean, I do like all forms of Magic. I find Standard a little bit stale since the lack of rotation. Playing against Sheldred and etc. still feels a bit dry, but you know, that doesn't put me off it completely, and I'm keen to try any of the other formats that Wizards come up with in the meantime, whilst we're waiting for rotations through the Alchemy block. So today I thought I would do two things. One, try and showcase a new style of video on the channel. To give some context for this, one of the things that I noticed before when I was making content is that the front portion of the video is the bit that people often watch the most, so finding out about the deck, which I totally understand. And then as the video goes on, you know, examples of gameplay became less and less interesting to people. So I think once you've seen a couple of examples of gameplay, it's not necessarily fun to just sit and watch loads more. So going to try and tailor it more towards information about the deck and potentially some highlights about how the deck plays against certain things in the meta, or certain key interactions in the deck, without necessarily having to watch through whole games to find those or see those. So just going to give this a trial. Please feel free to give any feedback on the kind of format or this video. I'm certainly an amateur when it comes to recording these things, so any feedback will be very helpful for me. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is start by trying a HARES deck. So HARES basically focusing around this card here, Hare Apparent, which, as you can see, I have 12 copies of in this deck, because the deck can have any number of cards named Hare Apparent. The thing that drew me to this card is I love the thematic quality about this card. So basically the more that you have, the more you get, so very much along the sort of rabbits theme, which I love. And also the fact that this common is the common that is selling in the real life in paper for over €1 a card at the moment, which is pretty wild for a common. That's pretty unheard of for those not that interested in Magic in the real world. So I thought there must be something to it. Now, obviously, that is partly because you can have any number of cards named it, so people don't cap out when they open 4 of them. But also, I figured it must have some strength in making a deck around it, or at least some fun. So that's why we're giving this card a go. Now, the thing that I think can make this card viable, outside of potentially like a Selesnya hard rabbits deck, I just don't think this is the best card for that particular deck. But the reason I think this could work in here is this card here, Raise the Past, which is a 4-costing rare sorcery. Return all creature cards of mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So we can play out as many of our HARES as we want, knowing that at some point we can bring them all back, which will create us a whole ton of tokens, which will help us win the game. How will those tokens help us win the game? Well, we're running Warleader's Call, which is whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So if we bring in like 3 Hare Apparents at the same time, we'll get a bunch of tokens, ping the opponent for a lot. It's also an Anthem effect on creatures, so it goes very nicely with the tokens. Impact Tremors is another version of this, but it just deals the damage on end, so it doesn't have the Anthem attached to it. So we've got 8 enchantments that will cause damage when creatures come into the battlefield, and then a bunch of Hare Apparents and a way to bring them back. We then have some other enablers in the deck, which are the Cottontail Caretaker. So this is one of the reasons this is an Alchemy deck. This is quite a fun rabbit to go on our theme, which is whenever it enters, we choose a white creature card in our hand, which is all of our creatures. That creature gets Offspring 1, which means we can pay 1 and get a copy of it. That's particularly nice with Hare Apparent because this works well in multiples, so being able to get copies of this is great. It also works very well with Valley Questcaller, which is one of our other creatures, which is an Anthem effect for all of our rabbits. So if we give this Offspring, we can get 2 of them for 3, which gives all of our rabbits +2/+2. We are playing 1 card which is not a rabbit, which is the Ruby Collector. This is a bit of an experimental card in this deck. I don't like the nombo of this not being a rabbit. However, this card is just really good. It's a 1/1 for 1 for those that don't know. Whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, which we'll be doing regularly because we are spamming creatures left, right and centre, We get a card, a Mox Ruby into our hand, which we can play, but primarily it's got the 1 and a red for creatures you control, get +1/+0 until end of turn. So it's a way for us to dump our mana into something later to buff all of our creatures up. I was trying a bit of playing around with the one that brings in 3 rabbit tokens, can't remember now off the top of my head, Hop to it, which also worked well. So that is an alternative for Ruby Collector. The reason I'm going with Ruby Collector in the end is because it is hit by Raise the Past. What I didn't like about the Hop to it is that if we do get, if that's like the creature form that we draw and then we get board wiped, the Raise the Past is not as effective in restabilizing us as it is if we have the Ruby Collector. I mean, not sure if that's a huge thing or not, but we'll give that a go. We're running a suite of red-white lands and then a couple of Fountainports to give us a bit of draw, sacrificing tokens, or a way to create some more tokens or create treasures, because that can just tip us over the edge sometimes, getting tokens to enter the battlefield when we have these enchantments down. One thing that I'm going to do, which is slightly new, is put this graphic on the screen just to go through some of the strengths and weaknesses of this deck in the summary. So as I kind of mentioned, it's resistant to control and board wipes, which is something that I always like. So if we put loads of Hare Apparents down, they get board wiped, we can always Raise the Past to bring them back. It's fun and surprising. I mean, there's something to be said for just having a deck that is fun, as long as you don't lose all the time. This deck is definitely one of those. And surprising in that I don't see anyone else playing a Hare Apparent deck on the ladder. So when people try and play against it, they just don't have a clue what's going on. It also has go wide to get around big threats, which are on the ladder a little bit at the moment. You know, being able to have like 8 3/3s sometimes is a big advantage over individual bigger threats. The other thing which I forgot to put in here, but is also nice, is that it works well against Heist decks, which is, you know, anyone who plays on the Alchemy ladder will know about Heist decks. Because often when they're trying to steal cards from you, they're going to get offered something like, you know, Hare Apparent, Raise the Past, and Ruby Collector. Almost none of those are going to be helpful to the opponent. You know, sometimes Impact Tremors or Warleader's Call could be useful, but my experience is those cards are kind of like edge useful at the best of times. So unless your deck is built around them, they're not that useful. So a lot of cards that our opponent gets offered when they heist us are going to be weaker than, you know, cards that they could have put in their deck otherwise, which is nice. I like playing like, you know, very narrow cards, because then when they get heisted, the opponent gets a bit screwed. Things that we can fail a bit at is getting overrun by mono red. I mean, this applies to lots of decks in the meta if they don't have, you know, life gain or very cheap removal. You'll note that I have not bothered to put any removal in here, with the idea that we are hoping to grind our opponent down by keep raising the past and burning them down with Warleader's Call. If they happen to get very big sticky threats or very fast threats like mono red, we can be in trouble. We could put in some like get losts or something in here, but I kind of like all the cards in here at the moment. So we're going to try and play the sort of mid-range beatdown rather than responsive. I feel like if we try and drag this game later, it's going to open us up to losing against more control decks. Exile sucks, as I've put here, so things like Torch or Porcupine Portent, those things which are exiling our creatures, you know, Raise the Past loses its value, and then we start to struggle a little more. And the number one card that is a counter to this deck is Authority of the Consoles, the reason being that we rely heavily around pinging our opponent by bringing creatures in on our turn. If we're doing that and they are gaining life for those creatures coming in, we're losing a lot of our damage, particularly since the life gain happens first, as it would be their trigger within our turn. So we can never sort of burn them down using the entering the battlefield. Often means they're running life gain as well, which can be a challenging matchup for this deck. So that's an intro to the deck and hopefully a bit of a sort of overview on where I see the strengths and weaknesses, having played around with it a little bit. This deck is not designed to be, you know, tier S, gonna stomp you all the way up to Mythic. It's designed to not suck and to give you some fun. So what I'll probably do now is just show you some kind of highlights from experimenting games on the ladder to sort of showcase some of the sort of finer points in the deck. Hope you enjoy. Okay, so this is an example where we are against Heist. Opponent has clearly stolen our Hare Apparent using Impetuous Lootmonger. We did manage to offspring the Valley Questcaller, which got bounced with Unsummon. So here we have a Raise the Past in hand already, so what I'm keen to do is try and burn some of our creatures into the opponent. I think here I will play Warleaders rather than hold up the Ruby Collector's ability. Whilst they can counter this, I think if we can, rather than getting combat tricked, it's better to find out up front. Okay, I was expecting the one where they could counter and kill one of our creatures rather than 3 steps ahead, so that is fine. I think we will just attack anyway, as we do have Raised the Past. It's worth 2 Mox Rubies to us. The only thing that they can block very profitably is the Ruby Collector, so not too much of an issue. The other thing that it's good to do, yeah, cool, is to encourage them to block with the Hare Apparents, because what we don't want is them to build up too much of a supply of Hare Apparents themselves, because more go wide blockers for them means it can be hard to get through. Triumphant Getaway, so more opportunities to heist. Interesting if they take more Hare Apparents or whether they try and get the Questcallers or other. Let's see. We noticed that they are actually playing Ghost Vacuum, which, given that they threw that away, implies to me they haven't seen that we're playing the Raise the Past, because it's pretty much end game being able to exile our graveyard. Okay, let's see. I wonder if they took 2 1-drops just because they're 1-drops with the Lootmonger. No, just 1. Okay, so we can attack. Should we leave the Ruby Collector back for now? No, let's put it in. Interesting blocking like that, because obviously we'll just pump twice and then play Impact Tremors. Just sense check we're not giving up, so 9. We could do a maximum of 11. We kill that Hare Apparent, which then goes to our graveyard, which is nice. Impact Tremors is in. So we've got 2 rubies and a Hare Apparent. Only 3 creatures going to enter the battlefield, which will put them on 2. The nice thing about this, which I didn't mention in the intro as well, is the scrying ability on Questcaller. Can always, if you bring a whole bunch of stuff back, if you don't quite win the game in that moment, you can often, or one can often, find the thing that will help us win. Interesting that they've managed to play something off the Getaway to take them up to 7 life. Gosh, we really have a lot of land. I think, do we attack and then raise, or raise and then attack? I think we raise and then attack such that we can pump with the Ruby Collectors. Because I don't mind if they are killing these things anyway, really. The way we're going to win now is probably not through attacking, given what they have down, but through... nice. Yep. But through the Impact Tremors. They don't have any good blocks anyway, so they'll be trading even if they do block. And if they put more of our stuff into our graveyard, then they'd now... didn't even see that my own combat trick of Ruby Collector, which makes the Lootmonger a good block. They do have to block both though. Okay, so that's enough of a pump. And we'll end there. Hopefully that attack was potentially a mistake. Oh well, it's a mistake to have raised first. Okay, so we'll play the Hare first, just because I suspect this one will die, and we're going to want to attack, force some blocks. Keep loading our graveyard. We do get more Mox Rubies, which, you know, if either of our Ruby collectors survives, which they can't, then we would have more mana. Yeah, that's not helping you really. This is a situation where we have an unusual amount of mana, to be honest, because of 4 Mox Rubies. So obviously they get 1 free block with Lootmonger, which is sad, but you know, all we're doing is stacking things into our graveyard if we find another Raise the Past, which we will eventually. Don't think there's any advantage to actually using this. All of our things are killing theirs anyway. Interesting. Okay. It's 1 more damage with Impact Tremors. And we might as well play the rubies. No real advantage to holding on to these. Not that I suspect they're running any discard, but you never know. We do have the Bivouac, which we can power up as a creature next turn. Hopefully we have a creature on top, because they are going to have 4 blockers. Laughing Jasper, eh? That is even better than a creature, unless they have a counter, which they are holding up blue. Nope. Okay, so whilst not the best Heist deck I've ever played, an example of how we can beat a Heist deck. Okay, so this is an example just to show where we are against a life gain bats deck. We are on the draw, which is unfortunate. I mean, in this type of tempo based matchup, we kind of need to be on the play, but you can see that we already can feel that we're going to struggle against this deck, because opponent is gaining so much life, being on 26, 28 already, that even though we're going to have a relatively nice start of Impact Tremors into an Offspring Hare Apparent, they're just simply going to be on too much life for us to beat them down. This is one of the things where having any removal would be helpful, so potentially going to consider putting some in for the Zoraline matchup. Both of these cards are kind of must kills, this one in particular. So yeah, you can see it's already over there, so we'll probably scoop here. Okay, this is an interesting one where we're in a colour matchup against Boros, and they're actually running Tajic, which is a card that I did originally consider for this deck, and I actually quite like as an idea for it, so we might go back eventually, just because it pairs so well with the entering, and it gives us a bit more sustainability on the battlefield against certain things. So just to show where we're at, we're kind of in a bit of a race at the moment, but opponent's now going to start getting a free creature every turn. With the Swiftfoot Boots is an interesting option. Charming Prince to scry. Okay, I wonder what your Charming Prince is for, what they're bouncing. I mean, this is an interesting case because this is not a deck you play against very much either, so you know, Tajic could be an interesting one, especially because there's we've got lots of small creatures for them to use their decent removal up against. Although, whilst it would look good in this matchup, I suppose it is loading us to be bad against Exile even more, which I don't really like. So the option here, 4, 6, 10 damage. We could go to 1. They could have a creature, and Warleaders call us to death. I think we don't block and try to win next turn. Not that I'm sure we have a way of doing that, but you never know. So we can do Hare Apparent, Hare Apparent. This Hare Apparent has Offspring, so I don't think we can quite pull this off. Tajic might just win with its value engine, and they went first. If we'd have gone first, we would have won this one. So, as is often the case with this tempo style of deck, the earlier you can go, the better. Just an example, though, of how the damage does play out when you get there. Yeah, we've got them to 2, which they can just block. both. Maybe I should have attacked first. They might have let one of these through, although I doubt it. The problem is this is going to create a creature which will beat us at the start of next turn. So just an example there of where it can be very close against other Boros decks and another potential card for the deck. Okay, so this is a slightly interesting start. Opponent started with the Signet and we started with a Hare Apparent. Now, opponent attacked with the Signet, I think assuming that we'd want to get numbers of the Hare up, which is how, if you ever do see the deck, most people do want to play it. I'm not sure why they've skipped a turn there, maybe they're missing a colour. But it's just an example of where that initial trade-off can be bad for them, even though they don't know it. And this one, even though we didn't have a Raise the Past, I suspect that we were going to get there eventually. Either way, whether our opponent has struggled or not, because we're managing to get those creatures into the graveyard early, which is definitely something you want to aim to do. I'm going to say no because the opponent missed their draw.